All right, it is 9 o'clock Monday morning, June 22nd. Welcome everyone. This is the Wisconsin Counties Association and the UW Extension, UW-Madison Division of Extension, Local Government Education County Officials Workshop, otherwise as we like to refer to it as COWS, using that County Official Workshop acronym. My name is Philip Freeberg. I am the local government law educator with the Local Government Education Center, and I'm hosting today. Let me give you some information to help you with your webinar experience this morning. First of all, acquaint you with the Zoom format. If you have any problems or questions of a technical nature regarding access, I suggest you put that into at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat box, and that you use that for communicating those questions. If you have questions for presenters, we have 300 registered for today, so we're going to have to do some management of questions. And here's the plan we devised. Please ask your questions. Number one priority, do that in the Q&A section that you see below there. If possible, I will hopefully be able to advise you that it will be coming up, your question will be addressed later in the presentation, just based on the knowledge of what is going to be presented. If it is one that I can maybe point you to the answer, I will try and do that. I have been working with governments for almost 30 years and am myself an attorney. And then if not, then we will try to have the presenters get to it. However, probably that will be at the end unless it seems like a matter needing urgent clarification. And because we do run out, we then ask you to visit the Local Government Education website or the Wisconsin Counties Association website, and we will post a frequently asked questions after today's program covering the things any questions we weren't able to address, or maybe those significant enough to maybe need repeating. The other thing I want to make you aware of, this is the third webinar in this series. If you missed the prior two, which covered important subjects, the first one is now currently posted on the Local Government Education website and also Wisconsin Counties Association website, and you can find it there. And we hope to have posted, according to my goals today, the one from a week ago will be posted by the end of today. And you can view those as works best in your schedule. Then, I think the only other thing point out is if you have technical problems that addressing through chat, and Chelsea Severin, who is our technical advisor from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, Educational Technical Services, if she can't answer it or for some reason you can't reach her, you can look at your original email from which you got this link, and there is contact information with the Zoom company itself that you can try to get help with. Let's move in then into our programming. Our presenters today, I will name, but I will allow them to better introduce themselves and to you, or allow them to reacquaint themselves with you. Our presentation will be by Sarah Dietrich Kasdorf, I have to say this much, a great expert on county operations and a major asset to counties, who is with the Wisconsin Counties Association. And she'll be presenting on running effective meetings, and I will not be talking anymore until later. Sarah?
right, good morning, everyone. I assume you can hear me? All right. Okay, my name is Sarah Diedrich Kasdorf. I'm the Deputy Director of Government Affairs from the Wisconsin Counties Association. I'm going to talk to you this morning about running effective meetings and meeting decorum. All right, I always like to start by putting this picture up, and I love these pictures from the Ukrainian Parliament in 2010. This is what can happen when meetings can get out of control. If you look at the picture, you can see we have one member of the body punching another in the face. Another member has an arm around the neck of somebody. Looks like somebody is getting ready to hit another person with their bottle of water. This is, really kind of what it is we are attempting to avoid by having today's, educational program. The caption on the picture reads, "Ukraine passes deal under hail of eggs." You can see they somehow managed to find an umbrella to shield themselves from having eggs and other objects thrown at them. Although one gentleman not so lucky as he does have egg on his back. But this is the type of activity that we would really like to avoid on the county board floor. And of course, all of this can be avoided by following proper procedural rules. So again, as we've talked about last week, there are a number of sources of procedural rules that are used by county government. The first is state statute, and of course, in terms of hierarchy, state statute is the highest level. And we must always ensure, of course, that as counties, we are in compliance with state law. Then we have the second set of procedural rules, which are your local rules, often referred to as your county board rules. Sometimes counties may call these, a county board handbook, for example, but it all means the same thing. And most counties do adopt a set of local rules as part of their organization, as part of their ordinances at their organizational meetings. And then finally, we have Robert's Rules of Order. And that tends to be the default procedural book that most, if not all, counties use. So if state statutes or your local rules do not address an issue, then typically Robert's Rules of Order would apply. In most instances, your local rules make modifications to the procedures that are found in Robert's Rules of Order. One caution, though, about Roberts is that it was not really written for government use. And the procedures we find in Roberts do apply to many different types of meetings. So we must ensure, again, that we are also taking a look at such things as the open meetings law and in other state statutes, regardless of what Roberts says. This is just what Roberts looks like. There's also an in brief version. For those of you that are new to this, might find the in brief version a quick read to familiarize yourself with some of the procedural rules that are found in Roberts. Just as a side note, I know we are all currently using what I believe is the 11th edition of Roberts. On September 1, the 12th edition, a new version of Roberts will come out. So there will likely be changes to some of the things that we see in the 11th version. So at some point, I don't know if counties will wait until 2 years from now to adopt the 12th version, or if they will adopt the 12th version as soon as it comes out. But just keep in mind this fall, as that 12th version comes out, there may be differences and changes. So we always need to be careful and ensure that when we are trying to answer a question, we are talking about the exact same version of Roberts. Now, according to Robert's Rules of Order, a set of procedural rules is necessary to facilitate the smooth functioning of the assembly. Rules, in essence, provide order. They provide a firm basis for resolving questions of procedure. And they also provide organizational stability to a group. Now, once a county board calls its meeting to order and has established that they do have a quorum, and that is typically done through roll call, it is then time for the county board to get down to business. And when we get down to business, what we're really talking about is taking an item that is on the agenda, having it work its way through the process to the point where that item on the agenda has received a final disposition. And during your county board meeting, there are typically 8 action steps that an item goes through, whether it be a resolution or an ordinance, as an example, um, for it to receive final approval. And what I'm going to do now is kind of walk through what those 8 steps are. Step 1, a member must obtain the floor. And this is done in a number of different ways. According to Robert's Rules of Order, you would stand in order to obtain the floor. However, more commonly at the county board level, someone would more likely either raise their hand, or if you have an electronic voting system in your county, you would be more likely to push a button in order to be recognized by the chair. So again, you try to obtain the attention of the chair, let the chair know that you wish to be called upon. And once you've raised your hand, then the chair would call upon you. And when you're authorized to speak, then you are said to have the floor. And a member must obtain the floor in order to make a motion or in order to speak in debate. So step 2 then is the making of a motion. And in order for business to be brought before the assembly, a motion is necessary. A motion is really a formal proposal by a member in a meeting that the body take a certain action. And it's a main motion that will bring business before the body. A main motion typically would be to adopt a resolution or to indefinitely postpone consideration of an ordinance. But there really should be no debate on any matter on the county board floor until a motion has been made. And again, according to Roberts, only one main motion can be before the body for action at one time. So in order to make a motion, a member would typically say something to the effect of, I move that, and then you need to clearly describe what your proposal is. For example, you might say, I move that the body adopt resolution 20-001 relating to the purchase of a new snowplow not to exceed $250,000. One thing we want to advise when making a motion is that you do not make a negative motion. I think things tend to get really confusing on a county board floor if a no vote means yes and a yes vote means no. So again, we really want to encourage folks to make positive motions. The words "so moved," those are words that we highly recommend you remove from your vocabulary. You likely wouldn't use these words much in terms of a full county board meeting, but you might see these words more so used in committee. So for example, if we look at the resolution I just talked about with regard to the purchase of a new snowplow not to exceed $250,000, we may be sitting at the highway committee meeting and somebody says, yeah, I think it's time for us to buy a new snowplow. And somebody says, yeah, sure, yeah, but I really don't like the orange color we have now. I think this one should be yellow. And I also think that it should be energy efficient. But then somebody says, well, no, because, we already have purchased, fuel for our fleet of vehicles at the county level. So I don't want to do that. And then somebody says, but we should really limit the cost to $250,000. And someone says, no, I think it's more like the cost of a snowplow is more like $3,000 or $300,000. And then somebody says, so moved. And as we talked about last week, if you are the minute taker for that committee, and somebody says so moved and somebody else says seconded, what exactly is the motion that is before the body? Is it that we buy a snowplow that's yellow or orange? Is it fuel efficient or not? What is the price that we agreed on? And so I think that's why it's very important when you make a motion that you're very deliberate and very clear about what it is that you wish to have the body consider. So now the next step in the process is that the motion must be seconded by another member of the body. The reason you have a second is you really want to show that at least 2 members of the body want the proposal to be considered. It doesn't necessarily mean that the seconder agrees with the motion, but instead it just implies that the seconder believes that the motion should come before the body, that it's worthy of debate. But again, you can second a motion without necessarily favoring the motion. A second is needed to advance the issue forward. The requirement for a second, according to Robert's Rules of Order, is so that the chair has guidance as to whether or not the chair should move forward and restate the question on the motion and then place it before the assembly. The reason you want to have a second is what you're trying to do is avoid the body's spending time debating an item that really only one person wants to have discussion on. And so by having a second, it shows at least one other person believes that the motion is worthy of debate. Now, in order to second the motion, you would just call out second. According to Robert's Rules of Order, there's really no need to be recognized by the chair in order to make a second. The fourth step in the process before I go there, I want to go back for just a second because I do want to make one other point under motion seconded, because I get asked this question a lot when we talk about motion being seconded. What happens if a motion does not receive a second? So if somebody moves and then the room is silent, the motion is really not put before the group for discussion or a decision. However, it is certainly in the prerogative of the chair to ask whether or not somebody chooses to second the motion. And then if nobody seconds the motion, then the chair would just move on to the next item of business. There's also a question that we get a lot with regard to what if somebody makes a motion and we begin debate before somebody actually seconds the motion. So if there's a motion and debate begins and you have a lengthy discussion before somebody has even seconded the motion, the lack of the second at that point really becomes immaterial, and you cannot make a point of order at that point to suggest that we cannot take up the issue because the motion was not seconded. It is assumed to have been seconded once debate has begun. If you do take action on something that did not receive a formal second, it does not affect the validity of that motion's adoption. Okay, then moving on to step 4. Step 4 is the chair restates the motion. Typically, the chair would do this by saying such words as, "It has been moved and seconded that," and then the chair would restate what it is that has been moved and seconded. It is really important for the chair to do that so that everybody in the body knows exactly what proposal is now before the body. And by repeating the exact language of the motion, the chair makes sure that everybody hears the motion clearly, and it calls everyone's attention to the fact that a new proposal is now ready to be considered. It is necessary for the chair to restate the motion for it to be properly before the group or the body before consideration. At that point in time, ownership of the motion is transferred to the body. And this is where we run into an issue oftentimes with friendly amendments, and we'll talk about that later on in this presentation. All right, step 5 is debating the motion. When the debate begins, the motion is said to be on the floor. So debate really involves discussion on the merits of the question. Should the proposed action be taken or should it not be taken? Should we adopt the resolution or the ordinance, or should we not adopt the resolution or the ordinance? With regard to procedure, typically the maker of the motion is allowed to be the first member to speak on the motion. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no member can speak more than twice on a motion and for no more than 10 minutes each time. Roberts also states that an individual is not allowed to speak for a second time if someone who has not yet spoken desires the floor. Now, most likely, and I found this in a lot of counties that I've given presentations to on this particular topic, that most counties have local rules that do adjust these time limits. If each member has 20 minutes to discuss or to debate on every single motion that comes before the body, your meetings are going to last hours and hours. So a lot of times you'll have county boards that may take this 10 minutes down to 5 minutes or down to 3 minutes. So you need to check what it is your local county board rules state with regard to time allotted for debate. Also, we see this a lot if you're watching C-SPAN, where you'll see members of Congress say, Mr. Chair, I yield my time. Under Robert's Rules of Order, members cannot yield their unused time or save their unused time moving to use at a future date. Remarks, when we're having debate, remarks must be germane, which means that they must relate to the pending question. The presiding officer or the chair must never interrupt because he or she knows more about the matter than the speaker or wishes to correct something that the speaker has said about the issue. If the presiding officer does choose to enter into the debate, the presiding officer must relinquish the chair, and they must stay away from the chair until that issue has been disposed of by the body. The reason that is important is if the chair is supposed to be impartial, and once the chair enters the debate and speaks, they lose their impartiality. So again, the chair can certainly speak during debate, but if so, they must relinquish the chair and stay away from the chair until the issue has been disposed of. The maker of a motion, according to Robert's Rules of Order, may vote against their own motion, but they are not allowed to speak against their own motion. And one thing we really want to stress is that members must avoid personalities and under no circumstances question the motives of another member. You may not agree with another member. You may think that somebody has an ulterior motive, that something that some action that the body is taking might benefit them or a member of their family. And I know we'll talk about that during the ethics portion of our COWS training, but you are never on the board floor to sit and question somebody's motives. Okay. During debate, this is when amendments are in order. Amendments are allowed, but only 2 amendments are allowed at a time. Amendments are used to modify the wording and within certain limits, the meaning of the main motion. If you are going to make an amendment, you must state exactly where the change is to be made and precisely what words are to be used. Secondary amendments are allowed to an amendment, but you cannot amend the secondary amendment. The amendment must also be germane to the topic of the particular resolution or ordinance that you are debating. And one other thing I just want to mention really quickly with regard to amendments is the concept of the settled rule. The basic rule here is that once the group has voted on certain words and certain words are added or not added, you cannot offer another amendment that really raises the same question of content and effect. So in other words, if you lose your motion and you say, I think it needs, the truck needs to be very cherry red, you can't come back after losing that motion and say, no, I think it should just be cherry red instead of very cherry red. It's precisely very much the same motion. And again, once you lose, you need to be a good sport about it and understand that you cannot come back with some words that are very similar to that. At this time, I want to break briefly from the PowerPoint presentation and talk a little bit about motions that can be made when you are in a debate. And so I want to bring everybody's attention to what is this little card. And this is the basic information on motions. You'll also, if you don't have one of those little cards, everybody should have received our county officials handbook this year. And what is on this card is found on page 235 of that handbook. I'll also make sure to post this, the page 235 from the handbook on the website as well with the rest of the materials. But a lot of times we get into debate and the question really becomes, well, what motions are in order? And that is where this card becomes very helpful to you. So if you were to take a look at the card, and we have a main motion on the floor. Any motion, and these are ranking motions, so they are ranked on this card from 1 to 13. So if we have a main motion on the floor, which is listed as number 1, any motion listed above this is in order during the debate. If, for example, we have a motion to amend on the floor, any motion above number 3, such as to move the previous question or lay on the table, would be in order, but to postpone indefinitely or to offer another main motion is typically not in order. Again, only one main motion can be pending at a time, but then there are other classes of motion that do take precedence over the main motion. And again, this card talks about subsidiary motions, privileged motions, and incidental motions. And so I don't have a lot of time today to really go over every single motion on this card, but I want to make sure you are aware of it and that so that you understand and know where to find this information so that if you're sitting on the board floor, you have this card in front of you and you say, well, a motion to amend's in order. So now what is it that I can I do? And the card even goes a little bit further to not only tell you what order motions may be in order, but it also goes on to say whether or not you need a second, whether or not that motion is debatable, can that motion be amended, and the type of vote that's required, whether it's a majority vote or whether or not it is a 2/3 vote. There are, incidental motions as well, such as to suspend the rules or point of order. Typically, those motions are these are non-ranking motions, and typically you can make those motions at any time. And so I wanted to make sure, again, you are aware of it. Page 254 in the County Officials Handbook. We may have sent everybody these little cards as well. If we didn't and you want one, please let me know. But this is very, very handy while you're sitting on the board floor trying to determine whether or not the motion you want to make is in order or is not in order. Okay, now we are on to step number 6, which is putting the voting on the motion. According to Robert's Rules of Order, the chair puts the question. The chair may say something like, are you ready for the question? Or is there any further debate? At that point in time, if the chair does not believe that anybody else wishes to speak on the motion, then the chair needs to restate the question, or in other words, repeat the motion. And then the chair must give direction. In other words, what the chair would do is say, for example, the effect of a yes vote, what the effect of a no vote may be. The chair might also say the number of votes that would be needed, whether it's a simple majority or a 2/3 vote needed to pass. And then the chair would also tell you something to the effect of, if you are in favor of the resolution, vote aye. If you are opposed to the resolution, vote no. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is how to properly end debate. In order to put a question, a vote, to a vote, a debate must end. And how does that happen on the board floor? The presiding officer does not have the authority to end debate on his or her own. It could be as simple as the chair asking if anyone else wishes to speak to the question, or they may say something to the effect of, I see no other buttons pushed or no other hands raised. So at this time, I'm going to end debate and we are going to vote on the question. Now, many of us have been to meetings where somebody shouts out, I call the question. And I call the question is not a motion that is found in Robert's Rules of Order. You will not find I call the question on our motion sheet. the reason that you don't find it anywhere in Roberts is calling the question is in essence giving a single individual the authority to end debate on their own. And that is simply just not allowed. If you believe that debate has gone on long enough and you want debate to end, you must obtain the floor, and then the proper motion that you would make would be to move the previous question. In order to move the previous question, it does require a second. That motion is not debatable, and it takes a 2/3 vote in order to adopt that particular motion and end debate. Item number 7, or step number 7, is voting on the main motion. Votes can be taken in a variety of ways at the county level. Oftentimes, we'll have voice votes taken or roll call votes taken, or you'll be asked to push a button indicating how it is you choose to vote. But according to Roberts, again, we must ensure that the chair asks for votes on all sides. So again, all in favor say aye, all opposed vote no. And that's how that would get accomplished. Step 8, and the last step of the process, is the presiding officer announcing the results of the vote. There are really 3 steps to this process, according to Roberts. The first is for the chair to report which side has it, or which side won. And then the chair would declare that the motion is adopted or the motion is defeated. And then the chair would indicate the effect of the vote if that is needed or if that is appropriate. So that gets us through the 8 steps of the process. At this point in time, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some rules of decorum when you are on the board floor. So according to Robert's Rules of Order, when you're speaking in debate, you must address all remarks through the chair. You are not to address the body, the gallery, or the TV cameras. And we know that is very tempting. If you are seated in the first row, for example, in your boardroom, and all of the other members of the body are sitting behind you, it may be very tempting to turn around and face the members to give your remarks. But Roberts would say that is not appropriate. Instead, you need to face the chair and address all your remarks to the chair. I've also heard in some counties that have their board meetings broadcast through public access television that they started to notice members of the board, once the TV cameras were rolling, face the camera in order to give their remarks. And so they would, in essence, be addressing the camera as opposed to addressing the chair. That, again, would not be appropriate either. Members also cannot address one another directly. You would really want to, avoid talking to another member in the middle of your debate. For example, if you disagree with something that the speaker said prior to you, you would not say something like, "Jim, that argument you made was ridiculous." Instead, you might say something like, "Mr. Chair, the last speaker's final point really does not make sense to me." If you do have a question for another member of the body, you would address that through the chair. You might say, "Mr. Chair, would the previous speaker, be open to a question?" And all of that would be done through the chair. What we really want to try to do here is ensure that the debate does not become personal. Roberts also talks about avoiding the use of members' names during a debate. The presiding officer should not be referred to by name. It doesn't matter how well you know your county board chair. You would never say, "Hey, Paul, I would raise a point of order." Instead, you would say, "Mr. Chair, I raise a point of order." The presiding officer does not refer to himself by his or her name either. The presiding officer, according to Roberts, would speak of himself or herself in the third person. So you'll oftentimes hear the chair say things like, "The chair states," "The chair rules," "The chair recognizes." Again, always refers to themselves in the third person. And again, according to Roberts, you want to avoid mentioning another's name when the person can be described in another way. So for example, you may refer to officers of your board by the title. You can refer to somebody as the previous speaker, the supervisor from the 4th district, for example. Not only does all of this maintain formality during the meeting, but it also sets a tone for members of the public who might be observing the meeting. If everybody starts calling themselves by their first name and showing a lot of familiarity with each other, it might look like a good old boys club to members of the public instead of a formal deliberative body. And so that's part of the reason why Roberts really wants you to act formally and not be too personal during meetings. During meetings, obviously, members of the body must respect the chair, but the meeting only runs smoothly if the chair adheres to his or her duties as set forth in Robert's Rules of Order. So again, during a meeting, and we talked about a lot of these things previously already when we went through the 8 steps, but the chair announces issues and keeps members on track. They restate the motion to place before the body, and for clarity, the chair recognizes members. They ask for votes on each side and announce the outcome, and the chair also responds to requests and rules on points of order. As I talked about earlier again, if the presiding officer wishes to enter the debate, they need to relinquish the chair. And again, then the chair should not return until the pending question is disposed of. Now, of course, if we're talking about a small board or a committee, then that would be an exception to the chair entering the debate rule. And again, I'll talk about that. One of the next things I want to talk about now is committee meetings, because we just spent a lot of time, discussing various rules with regard to and procedures with regard to how things work on the county board floor. But oftentimes, because we do have committees and committees are of a much smaller size, some of these rules that we talked about don't necessarily apply in the same manner. So, as stated earlier, the general rule is to have a motion first and then discussion. But in a smaller committee, it would be acceptable to have discussion first before a motion. And that is because oftentimes when you are in a committee, you are taking up an issue for the first time and you are discussing the issue and trying to develop the solution or trying to develop the position. And so oftentimes some debate and some discussion would be appropriate, not only appropriate, but useful before a motion is made. Also in committee, according to Robert's Rules of Order, again, members can raise their hand instead of standing when seeking the floor. Members can remain seated during debate and discussion, whereas in Roberts, they recommend that you stand during a debate if you have the floor. Again, as just mentioned on the previous slide, informal discussion is permitted before a motion is pending. And members can also speak as often and as long as they like. So according to Roberts, there is no 2 times 10-minute rule that applies to committees. But again, I would check your local county board rules to see whether or not you have a rule in place with regard to committees. Again, in a committee, the chair may, without stepping down, discuss, debate, and vote on the questions. And again, this gets to real formal process in Roberts, but the chair does not need rise when putting a motion to a vote. All right, and so I'm going to use, again, most of the rest of my time here to talk about commonly misused motions and misconceptions. So the first concept I want to talk about here is nominations and elections. So while a body typically goes through a nomination process prior to, say, the election of officers, nominations are not necessary in the sense that each member is free to vote for anyone who is eligible to be elected, which is typically any member of the body. So once you have, you've taken nominations with regard to the chair of the body as an example, and say 2 people are nominated, you are not limited to voting to just those 2 people. You can vote for anybody else in the body. Also, when making a nomination, according to Roberts, you do not need to be recognized by the chair. You can certainly just shout out your nomination. A lot of folks think they cannot nominate themselves. That is not the case. An individual is certainly able to nominate themselves for a position. A second is not required when taking nominations, but sometimes a second is done to show support. In addition, there is no requirement to ask 3 times when seeking nominations, but the chair really needs to ensure that all members have ample time to make a nomination before closing nominations. With regard to elections, Roberts talks about the impropriety of limiting voting to the 2 leading candidates. Oftentimes, and this relates to what we talked about on the previous slide, but oftentimes you might have 2 candidates that may represent 2 different factions on your board. And if you were to continue to vote and vote and vote, you may never come to an agreement on one of those 2 candidates, but there may be a third person or another individual on the body who may, in essence, be what it would be considered a compromise candidate. So again, you have the ability to vote for anyone that you choose to vote, that you wish to vote for, who is eligible. Again, not just the 2 leading candidates. One of the questions we get asked a lot, especially right before county board organizational meetings, is if we have 3 or 4 people running for chair, do we take the person who has received the lowest number of votes off when we vote again? And the answer to that is absolutely not. It is improper, according to Roberts, to remove the nominee with the lowest votes, and instead you would continue to repeat your balloting until you have a winner. Sometimes balloting can take a long time. There was one county board chair election in Milwaukee County where I believe it took 46 times to vote in order for them to come up with their county board chair. All right, real quickly in the few minutes I have left. Probably the most misused motion is the motion to lay on the table. The motion to lay on the table temporarily sets aside the matter with the intent to take up the matter later in the meeting. It is commonly misused in place of postponing indefinitely or postponing to a certain time. The motion to lay on the table does need a second. It is not debatable, and a majority vote is required to pass it. Again, the motion halts consideration without debate, and that's why we want to be careful when using the motion to lay on the table, because we want to ensure we're not violating the rights of the minority and individual members. The motion to lay on the table is typically out of order if there is no other urgent matter pending. Where a motion to lay on the table might be appropriate in a county board meeting is if you have a guest speaker scheduled to arrive at a particular time and is slated to speak at, say, 7:15 p.m., the hour of 7:15 p.m. arrives, you may choose at that point in time to table the motion, knowing that you are going to take it up once the guest speaker has finished their remarks. Another time it might be appropriate to lay on the table at a meeting is, say, a question has arisen and the body has asked the corporation counsel for an answer, and the corporation counsel says, I don't have that particular statute book next to me at the moment. Let me run up to my office and get it, at which point you may lay that motion on the table until the corporation counsel comes back with their statute book and the answer. But again, the intention with lay on the table is to take up that item later on in the same meeting. Now, the motion to postpone can be used to delay a pending action. If you are going to make the motion to postpone, it must be to a time specific. It needs to be to a definite day, a meeting, an hour, or until after maybe a certain event has occurred. Oftentimes you would postpone to a time certain, which might be, at the next county board meeting, for example. The motion to postpone is debatable. It does need a second. It can be amended, and it does require a majority vote. The chair, if somebody were to make a motion to just postpone, the chair would need to rule that motion out of order. and becomes the role of the chair at that time to clarify what the member's intent is. Is it to postpone until another meeting? Is it to postpone the item indefinitely? Or if the intention is to take it up again at the same meeting, then the chair would advise that the proper motion could potentially be tabling. The motion to postpone indefinitely is the motion that is used when the body declines to take a position on a matter. The motion does require a second. It is debatable. Adoption of the motion to postpone indefinitely, in essence, kills the motion, but it also avoids a direct vote on the question. This motion is really useful if you want to dispose of a badly chosen main motion that cannot be either adopted or rejected without undesirable questions. And I see I am running out of time here. So as we discussed earlier, the motion to move the previous question, I'm not going to go through this again, but I did want to just again highlight the importance of making sure that we understand that call to question is not an appropriate motion, is under Robert's Rules of Order, and said the appropriate motion, if you want to end debate, is to move the previous question. Adopting entire reports. We did talk about this a little bit last week when we talked about agenda and motions. Oftentimes you'll have a report that is provided to the county board and then it's silent. People don't know what to do. Again, our recommendation here, and Robert says it as well, that it is seldom wise to adopt an entire report, because that may show that you agree with every word in the report, which may not necessarily be the case. Again, you should just say thank you. The last point I'm going to talk about before I end here is friendly amendments. A friendly amendment is often used to describe an amendment that is offered by someone who is in sympathy with the purpose of the main motion. Regardless of whether or not the maker of the motion accepts the amendment, it must be open to debate and voted on, unless, of course, the body chooses to adopt it by unanimous consent. A friendly amendment really should be handled under the same rules as amendments generally, which means it requires a second, it can be debated, it can be amended, and it would be adopted by a majority vote. Again, oftentimes, when folks talk about friendly amendments, we'll often, hear other folks comment or say something like amendments don't have sentiment. In essence, according to Robert, there is really no such thing as a friendly amendment. Again, this gets back to the process and procedure that we talked about earlier, where once the chair restates the motion at that point belongs to the body. It is no longer belongs to the maker, which means the maker no longer has the ability to accept or not accept what folks tend to deem to be a friendly amendment. The last two slides that I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on here just talk about a point of order and the process that you need to follow if you believe that the rules are being violated. You can make a point of order, and you can make that point of order at any time, and then it is up to the chair to decide or to rule on that point of order. And again, if you do not agree with what the chair has stated or with their ruling, then there is the ability to appeal the ruling of the chair. With that, I am out of my time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Philip and to Daniel.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think real quick, primarily for the reason that I was all thumbs at the point that this question came up and I meant to type the answer. And the question is, does the chair have to ask for a motion to be tabled or delayed, or does it come organically from the body?
Yeah, I would think in most instances, motions would come organically from the body. However, if it is an instance where a guest speaker has arisen or there's a particular item on the agenda that has been scheduled for a particular time, the chair at that point would certainly recognize, we said it according to the agenda, we were going to take up this issue at 7:25. 7:25 has arisen. May I have a motion from the floor to to table this item until after the item scheduled for 7:25 has been proposed. So it can come organically, but some of it's really, it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, and I would throw in it. Sometimes the chair might make a gentle suggestion by saying the chair would enter, since we have, say, Sarah Dietrich Hasdorf from the Counties Association here. I would entertain a motion to postpone, or excuse me, not postpone, but to table this matter till later in the pending matter till later in the meeting. Okay, moving along, we will go to our next session, and as you can see, County Budget Basics is coming up, and this one is chock full of information. So put your ears on high alert, and I think you'll come out ahead. But once again, we will follow the same thing as if I can direct you to an answer, I will do so. If not, we will try to get to it at the end, and anything that we missed, we will try to generate a frequently asked questions that will go up on both of the organizations, the Counties Association and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension Local Government Education website. Daniel, then, I am going to bow out at this time and turn the matter over to you.
Thank you, Philip. Again, my name is Daniel Foth. I'm a local government specialist and currently the interim program manager for the Local Government Education Program, University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. For those of you who are new county officials, congratulations on your election and decision to lead your county today and into the future. We have a large group of attendees today, so I'll restate what Philip said earlier. If time does not allow me to answer all questions at the end of the presentation, we will create a FAQ sheet to be added with the materials available online. I also want to acknowledge Kyle Christensen, who wrote the county budgets and financial management part of the County Officials Handbook and did an excellent job. Much of this presentation is based on that material. Also, John Hockhammer, who used to give this presentation all over the state, and I stole many of his ideas. And then finally to Keith Stray and Norb Kirk, who reviewed the presentation and made many useful comments, and I'm very appreciative to their efforts.
And it's Hockhammer, not Hockhammer.
Hockhammer, well, thank you.
If he were here, he would say that.
I know. Thank you, Philip. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about budget requirements, what is a budget, developing the budget, the cycle, budget challenges and types, and the budget team. So let's go have some fun talking about budgets. So first thing we're going to do is a poll. And the way the poll works is, I'm going to launch it, is I would like all of you to tell me how long you've been in your local government position. 1 to 3 years, 4 to 7 years, 8 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, or more than 15 years. So if you would please respond, that'd be great. And don't do number 2 yet. We'll get to that in a second. A little slow responding. Well, got a lot of shy people today. Only 28% responded, but it looks like the vast majority of you are 1 to 3 years. So I'm assuming that'll kind of hold up. Oops. And then the next question is, I also like to understand how smart the group is I'm working with. So if you would answer again the poll again. A being I am brilliant. B, it's no one's business but my own how brilliant I is. C, I'm smarter than the average bear. D, I'm pretty darn smart, but I keep that to myself. And D, average brain power, but working on it. I'm going to relaunch the poll. And please respond to question 2, intelligence quotient. And we're getting a few more responses this time, so maybe they like this answer or this question better. And we're going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. And so we have a tie for I'm smarter than the average bear, and I'm pretty darn smart, but I keep that to myself. And just as a reference, when I work with municipal clerks on effective meetings, they usually answer D. The city and village parliamentary procedure effective meeting workshops I've been doing have been answering A and B. So since all of you are here in a budget workshop, it looks like C and D is your, C, D, and E are your answers. It's been evenly split between the three. So thank you for taking those polls. Let's get to the presentation. So, why do you have to have a budget for your county, other than the fact it's a good idea? Wisconsin statutes require you to have a budget. Wisconsin Statute 6590 govern municipal budgets generally. This year they were amended to allow all municipalities, that also includes counties, 2-year budgets, so you can budget biennially now. The key thing to remember with the Wisconsin requirements is that you must show all revenues and expenditures. You got to show where all of your dollars are coming in from and how they're going out the door. That's the key. Also, Wisconsin Statute 5960 applies to counties with a population over 750,000, which is just Milwaukee County currently, but also applies to any county with a county executive or county administrator that elects to be subject to this section. So one thing you need to find out is, are you subject to 6590 or 5960 in terms of the budget requirements? Now we're going to talk a little bit about the areas for you to consider in developing your budget. You can use any of these or not, it's up to you. I just provide them for your benefit and education. First, I believe that a budget reflects what a community values. The county officials handbook says that the budget is the single most important duty that you have as an elected official or county staff, that the budget should reflect the county's priorities. It determines the services provided, how much, and funding impacts every county resident. And I also added to this list equity versus equality. Many times when you're budgeting, especially when you're cutting budgets, you say, well, it's fair if we cut everybody 10% across the board. That's just the best way to do this. However, as the graphic makes clear, equality means that some people are still going to be able to reach the apple. Some people are close to reaching the apple, and some people don't have a chance of reaching the apple. But if you have an equity approach, that means everybody has a chance to get to the apple. So when you're deciding whether you're going to increase or decrease budgets by departments, I suggest you take a look at what's most important, what's the equity in making the decision. For example, do you need good parks or public safety? What's more important? And some may argue either one. So keep those kinds of equity considerations in mind as you're thinking about your county budget. What's the purpose of a budget? It's an accounting document that is a record and control of revenues and expenditures. It's a management document that determines who can spend how much and where the funds can be spent. It's a decision-making document as the basis for decisions by the board and staff, what the resource allocations are in terms of your plans, controls, and motivations, monitoring performance and forecasting income and expenditures, and hopefully efficient management of limited resources. And finally, it's a communication document because it informs the public how the county budget priorities and what the mandates are, and helps them understand how their tax dollars are being spent. There are priority factors in making your budget. First is the political environment, what the citizen involvement and feedback might be, the economic environment, and we're certainly all looking in that now with COVID-19, in terms of recessions and expansions, inflation rates, which hasn't been an issue lately, but was a huge issue a few years ago, interest rates, and competition for business investment. It's a social environment in terms of your population change with the 2020 census coming up and redistricting next year. That'll be a huge issue. Your age distribution, your personal income distribution within the county, and the legal environment. What's the history, the mandates required, available funding, how do levy limits impact your revenues, how do share revenue changes impact your revenues, and the fact, of course, you must have a balanced budget. Developing the budget. If you are new, and it looks like there a lot of you are, take a look at the historical past and the data that you can observe on your own. What existing county plans are there? Is there a county comprehensive plan? There should be. Is there a county capital improvement plan, strategic plan? How do those plans impact the budget or inform the budget? What are the mandated services and funding? What's the level of service you want your county to provide? And one thing important to think about is that policies typically outlast people. What you all decide is policy today as your county board may outlast all of you into the future in terms of your positions. And again, finally, prioritization. So let's talk a little bit about the revenue sources. There's the property tax, special tax levies, fund balances, and non-property tax revenue, and that is all authorized by statute, and that includes intergovernmental aids, transportation aids, county sales tax, if you have one. There's 4 counties that do not, license permits and fees, penalties and fines, etc. Now, which of these revenues, if this chart shows the spread, and this is the average spread for all counties across the state. Your county, I expect, will be different, but about a third of the revenues rely on or come from the property tax. Other taxes, which are typically sales tax, that's a small. Shared revenues, which is federal, state, highway, and locals, about 25%. And then the other resources and other aids are the next third of the budget. What's important to understand here is what's controllable and what's not. And I think the way to think about it is what's kind of controllable and what's not, because all of these are controllable. For example, the property tax is pretty stable. However, if we have another recession like we did in 2009, obviously the property tax levies are going to go down because of the value of homes going down. Expenditures. What are the major categories? Health and human services, law enforcement, other public safety, parks, and others. Some counties have nursing homes, solid waste facilities, sanitation, recycling, etc. And here's how they split out. 33 or a third of the budget goes for health and human services. Law enforcement is about 10% of the budget. Administration is the next largest chunk at about 17.5% of the budget. This just gives you a feel again for what all counties, how their expenditures chart out. The important thing to remember here is that your county is different. This is just information. Who manages the budget process? If you have a county executive, the county executive develops and submits the budget to the county board and has line item veto authority. If you have a county administrator, that person manages the development budget and submits it to the county board. That person works with department heads, standing committees, and the finance committee. If you have administrative coordinator, or you use some other person like the finance director or the clerk or some other person, that person is typically called the budget coordinator. For the rest of this presentation, I'm lumping all of these people and calling them collectively budget coordinator just for ease of conversation. So the budget calendar. Calendar here lists for the responsibilities. I won't go through each one of them, but what I want to focus on is that I am suggesting that in addition to approving your fiscal guidelines in June, you also determine what your community engagement plan is. In other words, how will you engage your residents of the county in terms of the budget process? And the process continues through September. In November, the county board adopts the budget at its board meeting, and then the treasurer provides the property tax bill to municipal clerks in December for mailing to taxpayers. So what are the typical budget challenges? There's a number listed here. I won't go through each one, but this slide and the next typically focus on the different types of challenges. Many times, a reliance on a volatile tax, such as a sales tax, can mean one year you're getting a lot of money, but the next year not so much. And for those of you, for all of us living through COVID-19, we're certainly going to understand how that impacts 2020 and 2021. Also, if your revenue projections are too rosy, or if you ignore financial checks and balances, this isn't as important now, but has been important in the past, forgetting to adjust for inflation. Additional challenges of the levy limit. How will the net new construction numbers come out for your county? How will they impact your ability to impact your levy? Making sure that you account for full costs. One of the real issues is you've got a project that you really like, you want it to happen, and so you lowball it cost-wise so that it looks more doable instead of putting all the costs in. And lots of times, lifetime costs, you may have a road improvement that the initial cost isn't so much, but your lifetime maintenance might actually amount to quite a bit. Is your budget aligned with your planning documents, as I mentioned before, your comprehensive plan? Are your services growing faster than revenues? I think we're all suffer from that from time to time. And I think the one I really want to point out here is the decision ignores dealing with long-term consequences of the decision. Multi-year fiscal planning. Financial advisors such as Ellers strongly suggest local governments develop a multi-year financial plan that incorporates capital improvement plan, your comprehensive plan, your other planning, such as a strategic plan if your county has one, and existing and future debt and reserve fund uses. Tax base growth assumptions. In other words, is your tax base growing or declining, and how does that impact your revenues? Your future operating revenues, in addition to the property tax, sales tax, and others. Also focused on your expenses for the future. What staff changes? Many counties do not, or local governments generally, really don't focus on the impact that some key staff changes might have on your county operations. Whether there's tax increment financing districts and the impact of those. Now, why would we do financial planning? One, because you want to tie it to your strategic plan, your comprehensive transportation, and other plans. You want to make sure that your budget priorities are spread over multiple fiscal cycles. You want to this helps stabilize your property taxes and debt issuance. Avoids infrastructure improvement delays, major item. Provides capital spending comfort. In other words, you've got a plan, you understand what your capital needs are and how you're going to address them. It also, having a long-term vision, reduces the budget and process stress. This is very important when you go out to the market. If you're going to bond, bonding agencies like to see a financial plan because it shows that you're very serious about your budgets and your financial operations. And it also helps board members and residents understand the long-term fiscal opportunities and impacts. And it helps gauge citizens for input and support. So next we're going to talk a little bit about cash flow and fund balances. Cash is king, or so the saying goes. Unlike your personal finances, county revenues are collected in varying months. For example, real estate taxes are collected in January and December. Shared revenues, are collected 15% in July and 85% in November. So having a cash flow spreadsheet that helps you understand when the cash is coming in and how it will affect your monthly expenditures is very important because you can't go negative. Fund balances, on the other hand, are really about the money that you have in the bank that may be dedicated to specific uses, or they're non-spendable. They're basically assets like lands, buildings, inventory. They're restricted because the grant or impact fees or debt service funds are in those categories. They're committed for capital projects. They're assigned for future capital projects or equipment purchases. They're unassigned, which is really where the general fund reserve comes into effect. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends 2 months of general fund expenditures as a general fund reserve. And Wisconsin County Officials Handbook recommends between 20 and 40% of your general fund expenditures as a reserve. If you have a general fund reserve, you should avoid using it for day-to-day expenses, except as outlined in your cash flow spreadsheet. And really the purpose there is to show how those day-to-day expenses come out of the general fund or reserve, and then how that is replenished with future revenues from either the shared revenues or real estate taxes or other forms. It's also okay to use the general fund reserve for non-recurring expenses, capital projects, or if you decide you want to use it to reduce debt. I got this information from the Eller's financial folks. If your financial advisor can probably have similar information for you. Operating budgets versus capital budgets. The key difference is that operating budgets is what keeps the county functioning day to day. The capital budget is what keeps the county infrastructure functioning year to year. And a couple of key points here is that capital budgets shows a minimum of 5 years. However, if you're buying a new piece of equipment and that equipment's lifespan is effectively 4 years, then 4 years should be the time frame that you use for funding that piece of equipment, not 5 years, because in 5 years, it's going to be non-usable. Also, when you have capital budgets, public and rating agencies very much like seeing how the money's flowing and how, and again, it shows the strength of your financial operations. Issuing debt. Wisconsin statutes, and also there's a constitutional limit that limits the amount of debt principal a county can incur to 5% of its equalized value. Debt can be a good thing for the right reasons. Strongly suggest that debt only be used for capital outlays, one-time costs, and not for operating expenses. Also, many counties, as part of their financial plan, have debt policies that focus on debt as a percentage of the county's operating budget, or debt repayment as a percentage of operating revenues. Types of budget. There are many types of budgets and approaches. If you Googled types of budgets, you'd probably have 100 different variations. These are the most popular, and these are also all noted again in the County Officials Handbook. So if you want some more detailed information, I recommend that you go to that County Budgets and Financial Management chapter and get the information. But briefly, line item shows expenditures grouped by department. The trouble with line item budgets, it's hard to know how the individual expenses break out between programs. Incremental increases and decreases for the department are treated the same, but again, you might have that equality versus equity thing here, and typically incremental is used in conjunction with line item budgets. Program budgets is where you've grouped by program versus by department, so it could cross departments depending on what the program was. Performance budgets, sounds great. Attempts to tie performance information to the budget, sort of a return on investment approach. However, it requires a lot of detailed understanding and work as to what those performance measures are. Then zero-based budgets, decision packages, and target-based budgets are just forms of performance budgets. I would suggest, especially for the new officials, regardless of your budget type, do not be afraid to dig into the numbers and ask questions. some key budget numbers, and these are important. What's the current ratio? That is assets, the county's current liabilities. Anything over 1-to-1 is good. The debt service ratio, I mentioned that earlier. The cost of principal and interest to annual income, 15% or less is good. And obviously 5% or less as a percentage of the total equalized property tax is good. Unassigned general funds. This author here, Mark Funkhauser, used Kansas City, Missouri. They had a 16% benchmark, which effectively was 2 months. So it matched the Government Financial Officers Association recommendation. Another way to look at it, are your net assets increasing every year? Yes is good, no is bad. Are you maintaining your infrastructure? This is where a lot of local governments fall down. Your infrastructure is an important asset. Just most folks focus on the roads, but all of your infrastructure is important. Do you have an asset inventory showing that you're maintaining your infrastructure? And you have a reserve fund to cover anticipated replacement costs. And the final area is maximizing your transportation and other funding sources. So for example, if you spend 10% more on your transportation, but you get 30% more in state or federal funding, that's what you need to do to maximize your transportation spending. Community budget and priority role and, community budget and priority setting role. I'm suggesting here strongly that you involve the community in your budgeting decisions and priorities. If you do so, it will provide local will to support expenditures. Because you have more information, it should help you make more equitable and effective spending decisions. Increased civic engagement might help you find some new community leaders, and hopefully it would create stronger relationships between your residents, community organizations, and the county. We'll circle back to some more of these ideas later. And then there's the budget summary. The Wisconsin statute requirements are here. What's important is that, one, you have the statutory requirements, which are in the first bullet. And then secondly, you're allowed to publish any additional summary information that you want to that would help inform the public, in your opinion. But that information is reported separately from the required summary information. So what is the summary information? First, from the general fund, all revenues, they're all shown here: taxes, public charges for services, intergovernmental revenues, etc. Expenditures, general government, public safety, public works, culture, recreation, education. And for purposes of these general categories that are required by statute, you get to decide what's culture, recreation, education, as opposed to conservation and development, etc. The budget summary also has to show your fund balance requirements. And there's a lot of comment here about proprietary funds. And what that means is if you have an enterprise, you're running a utility, a landfill, maybe you're helping some business incubators. That's one example of proprietary fund. Another example is internal service funds. So let's say you pay all of your county employee health insurance out of a single fund. That would be an internal service fund. Again, as I noted earlier, all revenue and expenses must be shown in the budget document. There is no such thing as a slush fund or non-accounted revenues or expenditures. The statute also requires public inspection and notice. You have to publish a Class 1 notice at least 15 days prior to your public hearing on the budget. Again, at the public budget hearing, it cannot happen less than 15 days after publication of the notice. All residents or taxpayers shall have the opportunity to be heard. And if the budget meeting is taking a long time, you may need to hold 2 or 3 of them so you can adjourn it from time to time. But this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with citizen involvement. There's a thing called participatory budgeting. I took this out of our former colleague Bill Rizzo's article that appeared in the League of Wisconsin Municipality magazine in 2015. If you Google participatory budgeting, you'll find some other resources. and I've listed some at the end of this presentation. But if you're interested in how to engage meaningful county resident involvement, I strongly suggest you consider participatory budgeting. It involves the community in budget decisions, provides transparency, helps make sure that all communities are engaged within the county, more equitable and effective spending, sound planning to manage projects through to completion, and hopefully creating stronger relationships between residents, governments, and organizations. And one other factor that has been shown from some other community, city, and county adoption of a participatory budgeting approach is that it has helped them immensely with finding qualified people to participate on county committees and the county board. So participatory budgeting is a way to develop a list of future leaders. And again, there's a number of resources mentioned at the end of this presentation. So earlier, the budget notice, here's some of the information that might appear on the tax levy information. This is from Ozaukee County from 2018. You can see that the county levy is going up, but the mill rate is actually going down. I particularly like this slide because it shows from the county's perspective where the levy dollar or where the budget dollars are going. At the levy dollars, the schools get 53% and the county only gets 10%. I think that helps the community understand that the county is not getting the entire tax levy. So part of your job as elected officials is your oversight, your budget and oversight role. One, maintain fiscal stability, set the financial policies and direction, approve and monitor, heavy on the monitor the budget, monitor financial performance and ensure accountability, ensure objectives are met, and confirm compliance with statutory requirements. And I want to hit one item on controls. There's a great movie that was on Netflix, but you can also watch it on YouTube called All the Queen's Horses. This one person stole $54 million from the city of Dixon, Illinois over a 12-year span, 22-year span. What happened here is, you say, well, gosh, how the hell did that happen? Well, first and foremost, the auditor didn't do their job. They had to pay $35.15 million for their negligence to detect the theft. This other accounting firm had to kick in $1 million because they entered into a very odd auditing arrangement with the Clifton Gunderson folks. The city had to pay $14 million because they did not, in effect, take care of their oversight responsibility, and they did not employ a full or part-time accountant who might have seen this theft sooner. So keep that in mind. I highly recommend that you watch the video. It takes about an hour, but it's a great lesson learned in terms of how trusting people can get you into some serious trouble. And finally, I'd like to end today with some thoughts about ways you can be thinking in the future. And I'm going to go back to 1900 for the great New York City horse manure crisis. There were over 100,000 horses in the city at that time, and it was predicted in 20 years, every street in New York City would be buried under 6 feet of manure. So something had to be done, and had to be done now. But what happened? Well, the invention of the automobile happened and basically took the 100,000 horses down to a very small amount. So what seems like either a good situation or a potential crisis can literally pivot in a New York minute. Sorry for the bad reference. And if you don't think that can happen, all you have to think about is 3 months ago or 4 months ago when nobody hardly heard of COVID-19. Albert Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I think that's a great quote to end this presentation on. As I mentioned earlier, there's a number of terrific resources to aid your budget planning and financial oversight journey. First and foremost, I start with the County Officials Handbook. Sarah mentioned it's been mailed out to you. Read it, not only for the budgeting information, but all of the other governance information that's contained in it. It's a terrific resource. We have some great information on the Local Government Center website. I also list the Department of Revenue. They have some great information. The graphs all came from data. The only challenge is that the data is always at least a year old on the DOR website, but at least it gives you some good history information. The other one, where'd I go here? Here we go. Wisconsin Public Policy Forum has some great research, COVID-19 related research, including a special COVID-19 report on the impact of COVID-19 on county revenues. Highly recommend you go there and read that information. There's some other good information, Local Government Financial Officers Association, and then some other great reading resources, which I list here. For those of you new in your job, or even if you've been in your job for a while, I highly recommend the Humble series at the bottom, Humble Inquiry, Leadership, and Consulting. They have some terrific information there about leadership. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And Philip, I'll take any questions or try to answer them.
Yeah, I do have one I want to relay to you. And I tried to address it to the person that made the inquiry, but you were speaking about average county expenditures, and they wanted to know how often that information is updated. And I think you might have had in mind a specific resource that I wasn't at the time of the question tracking.
Sure. That information came from the Department of Revenue's website. And there they have a spreadsheet that lists every county's expenditures and revenues as of 2018. That's the last year reported. So sometime this year, they'll have 2019 up. And so what I did was just download the spreadsheet and create an average based on that information.
Yeah. And I believe it's August or September of the year. They usually can start seeing that information has been pulled together. And also some much older information, but in terms of looking at it, you refer to the GREAT program, which you access on our website, which will show expenditures for all levels of local governments. And you can do comparisons and see trends exploring on that website. Sarah, did you have something to add?
If I could too, I just want to make a pitch for a publication that comes from Forward Analytics, which is the research arm of the Wisconsin Counties Association. I don't know how much you can see. This is called the Green Book of County Facts, and it goes through a number of facts and figures that relate to county government, whether it's population. It talks about county total spending, identifies county spending in various areas. We send this out on an annual basis. The latest and newest version of the Green Book that has more information than last year's version did is currently at the printers right now. You think sometime in early July, it will be mailed out to all county officials as well. So if you're looking for additional facts about what your county statistics may look like and how you compare to other counties, the Green Book will be sent to you in the next couple of weeks.
Sarah, is this document updated regularly also? It's the
History, services, and funding piece.
Yeah,
yes.
That's also a great reference if you're looking for what the clerk and the treasurer do in terms of the budget requirements.
Yep, that was updated, and I believe that was, I'm trying to remember, I think that was printed in the April edition, I want to say, of our magazine. So all April or May edition. So all county officials should have access to it. It's also on our website at wicounties.org under the publications section. And if you'd like paper copies of the latest document, just contact our office and we'd be happy to send them out to you.
And a question was asked, but it's a great question because I was going to, I think it's important to do this reminder. If you really love today's programming and want to see it again, we will be posting it online when the video becomes available, and you can access it either through the Wisconsin Counties Association website or the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Local Government Education website. Links are in the materials that are handed to you for those sites. And so not only will this program be posted later this week, the prior two programs will be posted. And as a matter of fact, the first program has been posted. Before I say goodbye to you all, I want to thank you all for your time and attention, and most of all for the work that you do and the work you will be doing over the next couple of years in service to your communities. We know you aren't doing it for the vast sums of money you will be getting and the accolades of your neighbors, but I think you will find it rewarding and inspiring, and I think you can be part of that inspiration. Next Monday, June 29 at 9 o'clock, this webinar will be back, and at that time we'll have discussion on Wisconsin's public records law by Daniel Foth, and local government official ethics and conflict of interest by yours truly, which I've always found very interesting topics, and especially if you're new to the office, it is critical that you avail yourself to this information. Before we sign off, I'm going to see if I can handle one last question. Oh, and appreciate that. Someone just expressed a thank you in the questions, and that remark is truly, truly appreciated. You all have a good week, and we look forward to seeing you in the digital sense and virtual sense of the word next Monday.